Hi there. So this is week 4. And interesting thing about week 4 is that we are actually about a fourth of the way through the class, which is kind of hard to believe. I think it's been a little bit fast and furious. And I know you all are feeling just a little bit stressed, but it's going to be okay. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I am happy to help you um, with with anything that we need to have. So I'm trying to decide which of these will be the best way. That looks a little weird, but we'll try that one. All right. So this week it is, what are your experiences in school? And this is the start of the readings where we're going to talk about some different things and different people's experiences in school. Let's see if I can get this thing to move. So what we're going to talk about today, just going to go over some introductions and little check-ins and things really quickly. Not going to spend a lot of time there, but just wanted to share that. We're going to talk a little bit about autoethnography. Last week, you took a dive in to the literature review, the first part of it. And so congratulations. I really think that the literature review is the hardest for students. So consider part of that already, that you've already attempted that. So that's really good. Then we're going to talk just briefly about the readings of what I want you to do with those readings in media. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what reflection is and the research question that will drive your autoethnography. And then we're going to look ahead to the critical incident next week. So the introduction. So our essential questions this week, if you haven't read them already, is what about my experiences in school? So we're talking about our own personal experiences. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what is whiteness in schools. And being from Southwest Missouri, a lot of our experiences are mainly predominantly white. So it is something to consider. And then the question about being color evasive is, why is that problematic when it comes to race? So these are the things, the essential questions you should be thinking about as you're watching the media and also as you're reading. So the one thing I want to point out, and I'll try to point this out every single week, is to be able to think about agreements that we need to do when we're talking about conversations that are a little more challenging. So we need to make sure that we're open-minded. We need to think about perspectives other than our own. And we're going to use this as a judgment-free zone. You know, we're not here to judge. We're here to learn and to make sure that we are, again, falling back to the open-mindedness, being a good listener and be engaged in the conversation. I think all these conversations will help you become a better teacher, and it's going to help you as a pre-service teacher too. Be uplifting and encouraging. I think that is really super important, and especially as we try to scaffold some of our thinking into different ways. I hope that as you read and everything too, you go back into your practicum experiences and you think about what this might be like for some of the students that are in your classrooms and how things may impact them. Okay, so let's get into that autoethnography. So when we do an autoethnography, you all have done a lot of reading last week and you pulled out some really good quotes. I'm going through those, but you're able to probably understand and be able to answer the question pretty well of what is autoethnography. And then also you're going to be exploring just a little bit, especially with some of the data points that you do and some of the readings and everything that you did last week, is why it's important and why should you use that, especially as a pre-service teacher. So one of the things that I want you to do is that this QR code or this link, and I've actually put the link on our Brightspace as well. We're going to discuss autoethnography in an AHA slides. So you're able to put your own thoughts on there. Your names and everything will not go on there, but I expect you to actually participate in this. If I find that people aren't participating, I will have you put your names. But I think the piece that makes this a little more easy to discuss is if we don't have to assign our names to that, and to really be questioning and everything. And again, it goes back to those community agreements that we're going to be kind, we're going to be open-minded, we're not going to judge, and we're going to be a good listener and engage in the conversations. In this piece, you're not engaging really in a conversation, you're just putting statements down. But I want you to make sure that we do follow these guidelines. So the questions that you're going to ask, and there are 6 slides, and several of them do deal with autoethnography, but I want you to describe what autoethnography is in your own words. And then on the next slide, what do you learn? What do we learn from using autoethnography? I want you to use 3 separate words on the 3rd slide to describe what you think autoethnography is. And what this will do is, in the end, it will create a word bubble. And then, what did you learn about yourself last week when you completed that identity wheel? So the activity that you did, what did you learn about yourself? So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about in regards to autoethnography. And I think that'll be a good discussion point later as we see what everybody generates in this conversation. So let's go ahead and move into the readings in the media. And I think this is really important this week. I have listed the readings that I want you to do. I have listed some choice for you to do. There's an audio piece that I'd like you to do. And then there's, of course, a couple of videos, including this one, that I want you to read. Because I think all of these are kind of, it feels like it's kind of a target meaning there's this piece, there's this piece, there's this piece. But I think some points it'll encapsulate what we want to understand. So each of your discussion points when you do your written discussion are going to look a little different because some of you are going to choose different pieces. What I want you to remember, and we'll talk a little bit about what we did last week when we were reading those articles to pull our quotes out. But when we read a scholarly article, sometimes it's really hard to keep the focus of what we should be pulling out of those articles. And we tend to highlight. I know that from my own experiences, when I start to highlight, everything's important. And I end up with an article that has tons and tons of highlighting on it that really sometimes don't summarize what I need it to do. So we look for quotes, and then we don't allow enough time to read what we need to understand. And reading for understanding is so important. So what we should be doing is that we should really be immersing ourselves in the article and really thinking about what the author's purpose is trying to tell us, kind of like what we were doing last week, figuring out what we don't understand so that we can clarify that. And sometimes creating ways, whether it's visually, whether it's through words, whatever it is, so that we understand that material better. And then again, always making those connections. So you're going to recognize the 4 C's because this was a piece of something that we did last week when we were looking for our quotes, and we talked about making those connections. So what is that connection that you make? Is there anything that connects to what you know? And then the challenges, or some of the other words that we use, which were, what do we want to know more about? Or why do we think that is so? Or I don't understand that. So that challenging or arguing or different ideas and positions that really bring a piece of interest to what you were reading. And then finding those key concepts of what do you think are important and worth holding on to. So when you walk away from actually reading this article, there are points that you can pick out pretty specifically that you want to remember. And then how do you change after you read this? So what are some of the new information that you might learn that really does change some of the ways that you think? All right. So I think that even though we did this last week, it's always a good way to interact with the text. But throughout this class, I'm going to have you interact with text and media in different ways, because I want you to explore different things that help you as a learner. And especially when you're reading information that is scholarly to help you figure out the best way for you to do that. 4C's is a great one because it really does immerse you in the text. So one of the pieces of media that you actually did that you were watching was Kleinrock's when she was talking about how to talk about taboo topics with kids. It was a TED Talk, and that was listed in your media this week. And so the big question that I want you to do, and it's on those AHA slides, I believe it's on slide number 5. It says, how does Kleinrock's talk extend your understanding of why it's necessary to explore our identity and experiences as a teacher? So I would like you to really jump in there and try to really come up with some information of why you feel like it's important. She brought out some excellent points in that video. She also had situations that could very well possibly happen to you. And knowing how to think on your feet a little bit, or at least learning about a time where this may have happened and you were able to, and this was shared with you, may be able to help you navigate some of those types of conversations as well. So one of the biggest important things is we start into each of our weeks of looking at different perspectives is to think about your own beliefs and what you believe and what you don't, because I think it's really important for us to be able to connect with others and to connect with them and not just say, well, we just understand. You have to really dig deep into what you believe and why you would or would not. It doesn't mean there's a wrong answer, but it does help communicate and help understand, your belief sets and how that does impact others. So some of these, questions that are on here, for example, would you date cross-racially? Why or why not? Would you adopt children of color? If yes, what ethnicity or nationality? Can you effectively teach children if you don't understand their lived experiences? I think that's a big one that we really need to really process and think about. And then just some of these questions I think are really good. And this comes from the Booty et al. Article on page 340. So you can actually look at that table as well. So I told you about this week's discussion board that is on our Brightspace. And this week, the way we're going to interact with the articles is that we're going to do what is called a 4-3-2-1. And the instructions are also written also on Brightspace. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of what I want you to do. Like I said, there were some required readings, and then there were some where you had choice, and then there was some video and media to watch and listen to. So I want you to write down 4 things you learned from the articles and media. When in your instructions, it says 4 different articles and media. So don't just go into one of them and list 4 things. I want you to go the gamut of, picking out 4 things from 4 different pieces. I want you to, and then make sure you cite those too. I want you to list 3 I wonders from the materials. And these are questions you might ask yourself. It's like, I wonder how this would impact me if a child shouted out in the middle of a group discussion that something about another child's race. I wonder what I would do. So that is just an example. So you will list like 3 I wonders that really just help you learn to navigate. I need you to respond to 2 classmates' posts. So we got the 4, the 3, the 2. And then for the number 1, I want you to summarize 1 sentence about this week's topic. And it has to be at least 144 characters. Notice it says characters and not words. So 144 characters. So if your words have, one word has five letters and then there's a space, it's kind of like a tweet that you would do on Twitter. There used to be a limit on that of 144 characters. But I want you to summarize what you've learned this week in that one sentence of 144 characters. And again, once you do the 3 things that you're required to do on your discussion board, and then you go to the 2 where you respond to 2 others. And make sure that those conversations that you have in the discussion posts, when you're looking at other people's discussion posts, make it a conversation. Really act like and and participate in a way that it's like you are having a conversation, even though you were doing it asynchronously. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the research and reflection. So you have probably looked at the Kember et al., the 4 levels of reflection. I know that we look at that in ELA 500. We look at it in ELE 501, and guess what? We look at it in ELE 510 too. But Kember's levels of reflection mean that there are more surface levels of reflection, and then there's the point where you move into deeper types of reflection that are more critical. So when we talk about habitual action, so this is habitual, it occurs when a procedure is followed without significant thought. We just do it. And then we move into the levels where there's some understanding. So we understand some things that are being told to us, but maybe we're just not making that personal connection. The level 3 is reflection itself. And so at this point, students are writing about the different experiences that they may have, and they can successfully connect, and there's personal insights that go beyond what they have just read. So they are making those personal connections. We do this a lot, if you think about it, in elementary school as well. When we're teaching reading, we ask students to make those personal connections. And that's more intentional when we do those things. Then we move into that level of critical reflection where it's not only do you understand, but it transforms your perspective. It really makes your thoughts and actions change from the information that you have learned based upon your experiences and the things that are going on in the environment. It requires us to recognize something and to change our actions based upon what we've learned. And I think part of this piece of doing the autoethnography is that piece of where we are really pushing you to move to that level 4. So everybody's research question can be the same unless you want to do a different type of research question. But all of your research questions, and you can use this question that is in red in your autoethnography. You have to have a research question. So we have one that will work for everybody, but if you want to piggyback off this or reframe it a bit, then let me know, and we'll see if we can work it out for you. But the big question is how have your experiences and identities impacted your educational experiences, and how will they impact you as a teacher? I think that's a huge question, and I think it's very, very important. You may be able to ask a sub question. So like you may say, how have my experiences of being in a rural school, changed my perspective of how I teach, in different situations, or your experience as a white person who growing up in rural Missouri, how has that impacted you as you move into different situations? What does it mean to be a teacher in an accountability era? Sorry. And how did my experience as a minority race impact my teaching? So there can be some sub-questions there if you would like. If not, you can stick with that one. That's the question you can put into your paper. So, but if you'd like to, finesse that or, change it a little bit, let me know and I'll help you do that. So thinking about those research questions, I don't want you to just say, well, I'll just put that one down. If there's really a burning question that you want to ask that ties to this, please, let's do that, because again, your connections are going to be so important in that process. So looking ahead at the critical incident assignment. So in the critical incident assignment, you're going to share your elementary experiences. You're going to share something that has stood out to you. So what is a critical incident? I have two that you can hit the QR code on from this presentation, and it'll show you what one that is a really good that has has hit all the high points of a good critical incident. And then there's another one that you can tell probably doesn't have as much effort into it. But one of the things it's a narrative. It's about you telling your story. It is your narrative. And for any time that you want to read a story, you want to read a good one, right? So making your story interesting. So you need to hook the reader. You need to make sure that it's something that somebody wants to read, that there's something at the beginning that just draws you into it and really pulls you into that situation so that you want to read it. And then again, it's that creativity of making people feel what you felt in that incident. And then we have a thing called rich, thick descriptions. When we talk about qualitative research, we talk about how to be so descriptive that we can almost feel, taste, see, hear any of the things that you write about. So a thin description would be that there was very few details. And the thick descriptions are the ones that really put us into that. Think about stories that you've written or that you have read, or maybe you've written too, and that they've really just drawn you in. Those are the kinds of descriptions that we're talking about for your critical incident. So here are the QR codes. There's an example and a non-example of critical incidents. Dr. Howard, she actually found these, so shout out to her for helping us with these examples. But I'm going to very quickly tell you a story of a critical incident that happened when I was a young girl. I was in first grade. So this was several decades ago. This was in a time where teachers were it was very a teacher-driven era. So what the teacher said, wit. We weren't talking a lot about student-led conversations. It was the teacher was the person with the information, and we were there to soak up all the information and everything they gave us. My first grade teacher, I loved my first grade teacher, but there were some things about my first grade teacher that didn't bother me necessarily, but for some other students, it did. So, for example, she was very strict, and she did not like to be interrupted. And so when she was talking or she was teaching, it was very clear that we were not ever, ever, ever to interrupt her. So a little girl, and I don't even remember this little girl's name, but I remember seeing her. She sat across to me. We all had our desks. She sat right here, and she was so quiet. And I remember one day my teacher was talking, and the little girl next to me was you could just see this look on her face. She had gripped the edge of her desk and kept gripping it, and which was what made me notice first. And I could see that she had this very stricken look on her face that was very, very upset. She was very, very upset. And it wasn't too long after that she actually wet her pants, and she sat there and just wet her pants. of course, none of us around her said a thing because we were told not to interrupt. And she was afraid to say anything to the teacher to be able to go to the bathroom. And this has always stuck out to me as it was, and I don't even remember because it's been a hot minute, but I don't even remember how my teacher addressed it. For some reason, I remember her being pretty exasperated, like, just go to the bathroom. But I know that the impression and the perception that we had as children was we were not to interrupt. And there was no reason that mattered about that interruption. And I've thought about that situation as an adult and as I became a teacher myself, of how, the stigma of that for that little girl. And I don't remember anyone in class making fun of her for that. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I don't remember that. But I know that the stigma that she must have had, and probably maybe still does, of that incident probably stayed with her for a very long time. I know as the person sitting next to her, it has stayed with me my whole life. And when I think about that as a child and as an adult, I think about, why didn't I say something? Why didn't I raise my hand? I felt like I had a good relationship with my teacher. Why didn't I say something? And that piece kind of still tears at me in my things. And I know that it impacted me as well, especially with thoughts in my head of, I never want that to be me. I never want to be in that light. I don't want that. And so that's a critical incident that really has stuck with me. It didn't happen to me, but it did happen to me because I was a bystander that didn't do anything. And yeah, that still kind of stays with me to this day. So look at those critical incidents, that the one that's a pretty good one. I just told you a story. I don't know if that helped you get into that moment of thinking about how to describe some of those actions. And remember, on paper, you have to be a little more descriptive. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of the data that you bring from this incident, from this activity. This is actually due next Sunday. And this is your very first piece of data that you're going to pull out that is going to be put in to your autoethnography. Yay. So this is a big piece. So the directions for the critical incident are on Brightspace under the assignment descriptions. If you have any questions about them, please let me know. So this is it for this week. If you have any questions, please let me know. And I am happy to help. So I'm going to try to